FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Crude estimates of annual expenditures required to limit mean global temperatures increases, that is, to 2 degrees centigrade, assuming this is a background. Roughly speaking, when you're very uncertain about the future, a standard technique, a very reasonable technique, is to say, let us create some kind of a quota beyond which, a threshold beyond which we don't wish to enter. Currently, amongst economists, those who work on global climate change, that quota is something like, let's say, 2 degrees centigrade increase in mean temperature from what it is today. And crude estimates suggest if you want to limit that, then the estimates are that something like 2, and an outlier of the figures that I've seen, there may be other figures, but from our purposes, I want to give you ballpark figures, 2% to an outside 10% of the aggregate GDP of rich countries over the next 20 years, 25 years, and so forth. Now, when you read in newspapers a figure like, say, 10% of GDP, especially if you're reading it in America, you would be talking trillions. And as somebody, a very famous US senator once said, a billion here and a billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about big numbers, real money. But here we're talking about trillions, because this is a $1 trillion economy. Once you're given this figure in terms of $1 trillion, you start worrying. I want to argue that that worry is misplaced, and here's why. Is 10%, an outlier figure, is that a large figure? Well, to get a feel for an answer, note that over the past 30 years or so, the GDP of OECD countries, these are, if you like, the club of rich countries in the world, has been growing at an annual rate of approximately 3% a year. Now, so only 3 to 4 years ago, GDP was 10% lower than what it is today, if it's been growing at 3% per year. So even if you were to leave aside 10% of your GDP for the future, quote unquote, and regard the usable GDP, your personal use if you like, to 90%, then that 90% GDP is what we were experiencing only, say, 4, maybe 5 years ago. Now you have to ask yourself, we should ask ourselves, were we that badly off 5 years ago? Is it the case that we were starving and so forth and so on? Life was probably pretty much the same then as it is now. So we're really not talking about big numbers when you turn the problem into one of what it felt like in living memory. And here, of course, it's not living memory, it's just the other day.